Hi everyone. So if you clicked on this video, that means you probably know that I recently was promoted from assistant to associate professor with tenure at UC Berkeley, the #1 public institution in the country. At this time, I want to take a moment to express gratitude to all of my mentors, my mentees in my lab, UC Berkeley academic personnel, office, and my external letter writers. In this multi-part series, I'm going to briefly share my reflections about the promotion process, my experience with meeting the expectations for research, teaching, mentoring, and service for promotion, and I'm going to share my thoughts on where I'm going to go after this. So thank you for listening, and I hope this series provides a close look under the hood for one of the most stressful experiences that a person can probably go through. So let's get started. So, what exactly is tenure? Well, according to Wikipedia, it's a type of academic appointment that protects its holder from being fired or laid off except for cause or under extraordinary circumstances such as financial challenges or program discontinuation. So typically, a latter ranked faculty member is evaluated for tenure between the ranks of assistant and associate professor. Lifeofaprofessor.com provides this nice graphic that you see on the screen of what the timeline looks like for tenure. And personally, due to delays from the C-19 shutdown and moving institutions after year 3, I spent 7 years at the rank of assistant professor. And because I moved within the UC system, I did not get a tenure clock restart when I moved to Berkeley. So my years of service were consecutive from UC Riverside to UC Berkeley. There is a time limit for being an assistant professor, and that timeline is usually extended if a person has parental leaves on the books or if there are extenuating circumstances such as the C-19 calamity in 2020. So in part 1, I'm largely discussing what tenure is and what that timeline looks like. And so what immediately comes to mind for me in terms of what I can compare tenure to is a marathon that lasts 5 to 7 years. And sometimes you're training for this marathon on the fly, you're tired, and at times you want to give up. So if you've ever seen anyone collapse at the finish line of a marathon, essentially that's what it feels like once you get the news of getting promoted. The same emotions are elicited. So when I got the news from my department chair that I had received tenure, I literally felt my entire body and mind relax in a way that I have not felt, honestly, since middle school. So the path to tenure, in my opinion, starts very early, and it requires a long record of high achievement because the skills that are needed to get tenure build on themselves even before one enters college. I'll provide some specific tips about positioning yourself for success for tenure throughout this series. So, what is the promotion evaluation timeline? The entire process for me lasted from May 1st, 2024 to May 30th, 2025, so 13 months. Let's start from the beginning. I spent the month of May 2024 writing up my statements and compiling the supplementary materials. Those materials were then sent out to external evaluators. So choosing external evaluators or external letter writers is probably one of the most important parts of the promotion process, in my opinion. So just thinking back about the time leading up to tenure review, it is really, really difficult to be under such intense scrutiny for so many years leading up to promotion review. So as most of you know, there are a lot of activities that require anonymous evaluations throughout our faculty experience. And these anonymous evaluations can be quite brutal, right? So for the tenure review, even though the letters are anonymized, half of the names that you put forward and suggest for letter writers actually get solicited to evaluate your tenure case. So most likely you can somewhat expect a more benevolent review from at least half of your reviewers, because the other half gets put forth by the department and they can't be people on your list. So again, while you don't necessarily know who the department will ask to submit letters for you, you can have informal conversations to ask whether or not people would be willing to support your file when you're away at conferences or while you're doing other professional service. So the rule of thumb for whether or not an external evaluator is appropriate for your case is that they cannot be affiliated with your institution in any way. They cannot be a former research advisor, and they can't be a former or current close collaborator. This is a very strict requirement, and there isn't much room for interpreting this or bending this interpretation. That's why it's important to engage with scholars in your field that you don't directly work with. So that's why traveling for department seminars, conferences is so important, because at the time of promotion, people outside of your institutional colleagues and collaborators should be familiar with your work. So getting back to the timeline, my letters arrived to Berkeley from external evaluators in September. I had the chance to review the redacted letters, and if I wanted to, I could respond and provide additional context if I felt like an evaluator misinterpreted the information in my file. In my case, I chose not to respond because I felt like the letters were fair and accurately reflected my accomplishments as an assistant professor. Then, after the letters come in, the department evaluates your materials, and in the fall, they usually vote for or against tenure, and every associate to full to distinguished professor has a vote. This internal review is pretty similar to the cyclical internal reviews that most of us are subjected to, except they're evaluating your accomplishments over the time since you've been appointed as an assistant professor. Also, if there are sub-disciplines in your department, the evaluation should take into account field-specific context for evaluating metrics of success. So I was allowed to, once again, review the department evaluation materials, and I was given the opportunity to respond or clarify anything that was written in those materials. And again, I chose not to respond because I, again, felt that the review was fair and accurate. Now you can see in the timeline that once the materials move out of the department, your file gets evaluated at both the college level and the campus level. At the college level, the dean will weigh in, and at the campus level, the academic personnel committee, which may have a different name at various institutions, academic personnel committee will perform their review. This committee is usually composed of faculty from different disciplines, so they are also charged with providing field-specific nuances in their reviews as well. So once all of these recommendations are complete, a decision is made, okay? If anything I explained about this timeline is unclear, feel free to post a comment below and I'll get back to you. So overall, I am extremely relieved to have earned tenure at Berkeley and for the process to be over with. So now I feel like I can really focus on doing more high-risk, high-reward work. I'll talk more about my plans for associate professor later in the series. Until then, I thank you all for listening, and I really look forward to sharing more of my thoughts with you all about the tenure process at Berkeley.